Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Tuesday, September 17th. I'm Bryan Driscoll. I think you guys hopefully know who I am by now. And we're here to talk some Notre Dame football. Saturday, Notre Dame gets another shot at it. It's another one of those 12 guaranteed Saturdays in which they get to play football. And Notre Dame is going to host Miami of Ohio. And so we're going to talk a lot about this game, this matchup. But today, we're going to do a few different things. Number one, we're going to talk about building on success. And as we talked about after the Texas A&M win, said we're going to find out if Notre Dame can handle success. And this is a phrase that you heard Notre Dame use after the loss to Northern Illinois from Marcus Freeman, Riley Leonard, and other players. We were asking that question before the Northern Illinois game, and we're going to get another chance to find that out this weekend. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. Obviously, beating Miami of Ohio in and of itself doesn't prove anything. It's about building blocks and building on the foundation of what you did last weekend, and that's going to be the key for Notre Dame. And we're going to talk a lot about that in today's show. So we'll have a lot to discuss when it comes to what I want to see from Notre Dame and, what I think all of you should be looking for from Notre Dame to say, hey, listen, is this another step towards putting the Northern Illinois game behind you? And who is this real Notre Dame team? I said this, I think, on yesterday's show or Sunday's show. I've said this to multiple people. We've seen 3 Notre Dame football teams so far this year. We saw the really good top 10 to 12 caliber team in the opener against Texas A&M that has some things to work on, but it's tough, talented, well-coached, all those different things, and can go on the road and beat a legitimate top 25 football team on the road. And then we saw the team borderline top 50 team against Northern Illinois, maybe, that just couldn't get out of their own way and lost to Northern Illinois. And then we saw a team on Saturday that could beat just about anybody if they play the way that they did on Saturday in all phases of the game. So, look, this is one of those games where we're going to say, okay, we're not going to find the answer to who is the real Notre Dame football team this weekend, but we're going to start to get some signs. And again, this game is, it's about Miami of Ohio, certainly, but it's way more than about Notre Dame and what we're going to see from Notre Dame this weekend. So that'll be the focus of our conversation today, first and foremost, is, who is the real Notre Dame? And what does Notre Dame need to do moving forward to really build on what we saw Saturday? And we'll talk kind of big picture about that. We'll talk about what the offense needs to do, then what the defense needs to do. And then, during each of those sections, I'm going to talk about the injuries that happened this weekend and obviously how those are going to impact Notre Dame and could impact Notre Dame and what they need to do to make sure that those things don't impact them negatively, because they had some tough losses from the personnel standpoint on Saturday. So we'll talk about that in the offensive segment. We'll talk about the offensive injuries. Defensive segment, we'll talk about the defensive injuries, obviously. And then I'll wrap things up with just kind of a quick overview of Miami of Ohio, what to expect from the Red Hawks this weekend and in Chuck Martin's crew. It's been a rough start to the season for them. They're having a tough time so far this year. They lost to Northwestern in the opener. They lost to Cincinnati this past weekend, and it's going to be interesting. Their backs are against the wall, so we'll talk about the Red Hawks and what to expect from them as well. So that is the agenda for today, and I hope you guys are ready to rock and roll. As always, there's no mailbag on this show. If you have a question or a comment you want to get read, just go ahead and put it in the super chat. Tomorrow, 1 o'clock, I will be back at 1 o'clock tomorrow. And we'll have our BISO hold after we do some different breakdown aspects of the Notre Dame-Miami game. And then, of course, Thursday, it'll be Ryan and I. We will talk keys to victory, and we'll talk predictions. Hopefully our keys to victory are as on point as they were last week. And I'm assuming that we're all going to predict a little bit wider margin for error than we did last week. Or margin of victory, I should say, than we did last week. And then, of course, I'll be joined by Bill Bender on Thursday to talk about some of the great games that are going on this weekend. So as rough of a weekend as this past weekend was, as far as marquee matchups, there's a lot of those coming up this weekend. So going to have some fun with that. And then, of course, Friday we'll have a mailbag. And then Saturday it's going to be the post-game show. So a lot going on. That's why you need to be, tuned in and locked in to Irish Breakdown. So let's dive into just who is Notre Dame, right? I mean, I think that's the biggest question I have to ask myself right now. Who's Notre Dame? And I don't know that any of us know I don't know that the Notre Dame players and coaches know that answer. Because as I mentioned in the opener, we've really seen two versions of Notre Dame, or three versions of Notre Dame. Two of those versions are somewhat similar. You could argue that Notre Dame would have looked the same. I think that they played better against Purdue than they did against Texas A&M. I think they executed better, independent of how was the quality of the opposition. I think they executed better. They had an even better game plan offensively. Defensively, I think that's the one where you could say the team that we saw on defense on Saturday was a better version of the one that we saw against Texas A&M, but it's at least similar. Maybe you could argue that the defense has been two different teams, but the offense has been three different teams so far. And so then you look at it and you say, who is the real Notre Dame? And if we're all being honest with ourselves, the answer is we don't know. I know that who we hope the real Notre Dame is, but we don't know, because when you have such a variety of and not even just results, right? Because it's not even about a variety of results. We've seen teams struggle this season. I hear people talk about, well, you're not going to beat Georgia if you play like you did against Purdue. And I'm like, well, you will if Georgia plays like they did against Kentucky. I mean, Notre Dame would have beat Georgia by 2 touchdowns at least on Saturday if they would have played against Georgia the way that they did against Purdue and vice versa. Every team is kind of going through that a little bit. Oregon's had a couple clunkers so far in games that they've won. Now, the difference for Notre Dame is they lost one of their clunkers, and obviously that's something that needs to get improved upon. But it's not so much about is Notre Dame a finished product or not. It's, and the results are not the same. I mean, you're going to have varying levels of execution this early in the season, especially when you have as many young players and new guys in the system that Notre Dame has. It's not that. It's honestly just you've seen very different teams from a confidence standpoint. You've seen different teams from just an execution standpoint, but more so it's energy and focus and toughness. A team that battles one week doesn't the next at home, and then comes back and battles and plays with great swagger the next week. It's just been that roller coaster ride that we've talked about under Marcus Freeman for a long time. And when you look at this matchup, and for some of you making predictions about the show, about the game in the chat, can we chill? It's Tuesday. We're going to have a whole show about that on Thursday, right? So let's just try and somewhat stay on topic today. But when you look at this football team and who they are, I mean, we don't know what we're going to get. And so then you look at this question. It's like I joked with somebody in the press box on Saturday, and I said, look, Notre Dame needs to look at their schedule for the next 10 years and cancel every MAC opponent and schedule a Big Ten team. And so when you because think about this, Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. They didn't play great against Central Michigan last year. I believe the last time they played a MAC team was then back in 2021, and they needed a last-second touchdown pass to win that game. They blew out a MAC team in 2019, but then in 2018, they only beat Ball State by 8. So this has been a problem going back well before Northern Illinois. The difference is those teams won those games and Notre Dame didn't. Well, you've got another MAC team coming into town this weekend, and they're not as good as Northern Illinois. At least they haven't been so far. But they do some things that if Notre Dame comes in with the same lackadaisical, not focused, non-competing type of attitude that they had against Northern Illinois, then this is going to be a much more competitive football game. And so this is an opportunity for Notre Dame to come out and say, hey, listen, we're not that team. That was an anomaly. We've learned from it. We've moved on from it. Hopefully fans will be able to move on to it. Well, if you want fans to move on from it, then you need to show us that this isn't going to be there again, that team, that it was a one-off, and this is a chance to take another step towards that against this Miami of Ohio team. It's also about building on the momentum you gained on Saturday. And it's not so much momentum from the standpoint of how you played per se execution wise, or that you won by 59 or anything like that. It's about saying, hey, look, you showed yourself to be a really, really, really good football team on Saturday. Can you now go out and say that, hey, you're a football team that is capable of bringing this type of energy week to week to week to week? And that's what Saturday presents as a step towards that, and a step towards saying, okay, one step at a time, right? Because I don't know if there's a win on the schedule, because how bad Florida State is, between now and USC, that gives us sort of that, okay, it's all good now moment, because what we've seen from Notre Dame is that you can be that team that's dominant for in 1 week. Go back to 2022, sandwich in between a horrible loss to Marshall and a horrible loss to Stanford, was a dominant win over a 9-win North Carolina team. It was a really good win over a good BYU team. And so you've seen that later in the year, a couple weeks after you get beat by a really bad Stanford team, you go on the road and smack Syracuse. You blow out a top 5 Clemson team by 21 points. You beat BYU 44 or BC 44 to nothing in the game. You could have scored 60 if you wanted to, and if it wasn't snowing. And so people talk about in the chat, talking about, well, what about Louisville? Louisville doesn't tell me anything about Notre Dame as far as, are they that team still? Because if Notre Dame goes out and beats Louisville, okay, great. Before the season, who thought Notre Dame was going to lose to Louisville? It's a very good football team. Notre Dame should win that game. Here's the point. It's that it's not about an opponent like, okay, so like, here's my point. Beating Louisville doesn't tell me that Notre Dame is on the verge of going and playing with Georgia, or on the verge of playing with Texas, or on the verge of playing with Alabama. It doesn't tell me that, okay? What it tells me is it's more about, can you sustain this high level for a longer period of time? That's what it's about. And so there isn't an individual game that's going to tell us, hey, Notre Dame has figured it out. Because when you look at Marcus Freeman's tenure, we've seen big time moments. This is the point. You blow out Miami of Ohio. Okay, cool. You blew out 9 of the 10 teams you beat last year. It doesn't answer the question, but it's a step. What Notre Dame needs to now do is show that they can string together these types of performances. And so it's not about Louisville. It's not about Georgia Tech. It's not about Florida State. It's about, you need to show that you can be a more consistent football team, a team that can go on the road and beat Texas A&M, a team that can blow out Purdue, but a team that doesn't have the Marshall, the Stanford, the Louisville, like last year, the Clemson, and the Northern Illinois games, where you not only lose, but you lose because you didn't bring energy, focus, effort, and those type of things. And that's what was so great about the Purdue game, and that's what they need to build upon. Is can you bring that type of energy and focus week to week? When I look at Purdue game, like, look, Notre Dame had a way more talented team, but they had a way more talented team than Northern Illinois. They lost because they didn't have focus. They didn't play with great effort. They didn't play with great energy. They didn't play with any confidence. They weren't hungry. They lacked all those things. Against Purdue, they had all those things. So when I look at this game against Northern Illinois, the biggest thing for me that I want to see is that this team is built on last week. That's going to tell me that this is a more focused football team than we saw. This is a football team that has the necessary leadership to be more consistent, and then a football team that plays a little bit of a chip on her shoulder. And that's really something that was lacking. You know, I want to present something to you all in the chat. And here's a question that I have for you guys, because I hadn't really thought about this. And a friend of mine said this to me, and he was super mad about the Northern Illinois game. And the comment is not meant in any way, shape, form, or fashion to be a justification or saying like, hey, the Northern Illinois was a good thing. His comment was this. He said he wonders if losing to Northern Illinois, as bad as it was, might not end up being a blessing in disguise for Notre Dame. I said, okay, explain to me what you mean. Because again, this is driving home from the Purdue game on Saturday night. and he was sitting there talking about here's the point he was making. This is a Notre Dame team that was getting a lot of preseason hype, and deservedly so. Talented roster coming back. Like everybody's like, oh, Notre Dame media's no guys. Like Jordan Reed, who works at ESPN, has Notre Dame as having a projected 11 draft picks from this football team. Like there's a lot of people that look at this team and say this is a very talented football team. And his comment was he thinks that if they learn the proper lesson from Northern Illinois, that this could bring this team the needed focus and maybe chip. Like this team was feeling really good about itself, and that kind of loss would do more for the team than, let's say, if they lost to a better team. Because like the point was that we were discussing, I said, look, I had this team going 11-1, and I couldn't tell you. I spoke at in front of a group of this Notre Dame club in Chicago before the season, and we do like this prediction sheet, and I do it, to have fun with them. And they asked me my record. I had Notre Dame going 11-1, and then the next one was, will they beat A&M? Will they beat Louisville or Florida State? And will they beat USC? And the question, and I said, yes, they'll beat Texas A&M. Yes, they'll beat Florida State. Yes, they'll beat USC. So the question they had for me was, well, then who did Notre Dame lose to? And I said, I don't know. I don't know who they're going to lose to. I just think they're going to lose to somebody. And so his comment to me was, do you think losing to Northern Illinois was a sort of a wake-up call for this football team? Because we didn't know if it would be before the Purdue game. But to watch them come out against Purdue and absolutely annihilate them and play the way that they did, his thing was, I think this could be a wake-up call. And it was a good argument. But here was kind of my response to it was, I hope so. But we'll only know that if they can do that, is if this just kind of becomes who they are. If this was just a one-off, then no, it wasn't a lesson learned. It wasn't a thing that galvanizes football team the way that you would hope it would for them to go on a run. It doesn't do that. If it's going to be that type of lesson learned and the kind of wake-up call that he was talking about, it's going to be something that forces them or causes them to have that level of focus week after week after week after week. So for the Notre Dame football coaching staff, it's going to come down to, you've got to find a much more consistent weekly approach to games. No more altering your practice schedule because of any other kind of reason. It comes down to saying, listen, this is who we are. This is what we need to prepare. If we got to pull some guys back, then we will pull those individual players back. Let's just say a Howard Cross or a Mitchell Evans or a Xavier Watts, for whatever reason, needs to have, he's tired or this guy's tired, then pull some of those guys back, but keep your practice routine the same. And make sure that the things that the sort of the frustration, the anger, and those type of things that you had going to the Purdue game, don't lose that. Keep that. If that's what you need for the beat of fuel, then let it be. And so that was my comment to him, was we need to see it consistently. And I actually think Miami of Ohio is the perfect opponent for Notre Dame this weekend. And hear me out on that, to find out if this team is going to be that. Because what we have learned under Marcus Freeman is that when they play good teams, they're up for those games. They haven't won them all. They lost Ohio State twice, but you lost to USC in 2022. But did anybody watch the USC game in 2022 and think, boy, Notre Dame didn't come to play today? They weren't playing hard. They were focused. They were playing hard. They didn't play well on defense, but they played hard. The offense played great. We're talking about the games where it just looks like they don't even show up. Right? And so can this football team be sort of like what we've talked about all offseason and after? It's, can they stay here? Right? Like the frustration with Kelly was they're always here. Never got too high, never got too low. So they beat all the teams they're supposed to, but they couldn't beat anybody that was as good as them or better than them. This team has shown that they can play with those teams, but then they dip way down here and not only play to the level of some of their lesser opponents, they play beneath the level of some of those opponents. And so to me, a Miami of Ohio is a perfect game for that, because let's just say Louisville was coming to town this weekend. Well, that's short. That's enough time after the North Illinois game and the Purdue game to say, listen, they're gonna, you know, they're gonna be really good. And they're gonna be really focused because this is a big opponent. It's at home. They're gonna be fine. It's gonna be more like USC last year than it was Louisville last year. Okay. But would that really tell us anything about Notre Dame and the issue that Notre Dame has had? No, it wouldn't. To me, playing a Miami of Ohio team that's 0-2, lost to Northwestern, lost to Cincinnati. I believe they've only scored like 23 points in their two games combined. If that's the team that's coming into town, if Notre Dame has learned from the Northern Illinois game and they've developed an edge that's going to maintain, then we'll see it this Saturday. We'll see that focus this Saturday. We'll see the maturity this Saturday. We'll see the anger this Saturday. We'll see sort of we're not only trying to beat you, Miami, we're trying to embarrass you. We're going to destroy you. Like, that's a big key for me. So when I think about what can Notre Dame do to build on Purdue, it's that right there. It's maintain that level of fire that we saw this weekend, maintain that level of intensity that we saw this weekend, that backs against the wall type of mindset. Because it is true. I mean, yes, you got the 66-7 win, but you still got that one. We've talked about this, folks. Winning by 59, you don't get brownie points for that. You don't get bonus points for that. You don't have now 2.5 wins or 3 wins. You still only have 2. You didn't beat Purdue so bad that I think I joked about this on Sunday, that the NCAA is going to now retroactively take some of those points that you scored against Purdue and put them on the scoreboard against Northern Illinois, and now you're 3-0. You're still 2-1. Your backs are still against the wall. So does this team maintain that edge? Do they maintain that chip? Or do they go back to where they were 2 weeks ago? We're like, all right, we fixed it against Purdue. We're good. So we can go back to being what we were. And then it's just, again, it's more of this, right? Or have they finally said, okay, enough is enough. We're going to fix this and we're going to be here. And that's why I believe Miami of Ohio is that kind of opponent. Because the thing about Miami of Ohio is, like, I'll get into this here later, but I don't know if their offense is good enough. I would say I don't know if their offense is good enough to beat Notre Dame. But as we saw 2 weeks ago, you only really need 15 points to beat Notre Dame if their offense doesn't show up. So the question would be, okay, is Miami of Ohio's defense good enough to stop Notre Dame? And that's a different question. I think their defense has played solid football through 2 games. It hasn't been great. And they haven't been great, stopping the run so far this season. So I don't know that their defense is good enough to do to Notre Dame what Northern Illinois' defense did to them. I don't know that they have the creativity on offense to do to Notre Dame what Northern Illinois did to them, but they do have a veteran quarterback, and they do have some things where at the very least it can be a much closer game than it should be. At the very least, they can make it a 24-17 game if Notre Dame doesn't show up and doesn't bring energy, doesn't build on last week. If and the reason that matters is because if, like, Akron was coming to town, or Kent State was coming to town, or like one of the really bad MAC teams or bad Sun Belt teams, like one of those teams is coming to town, then I don't know. You could just kind of roll the ball out a little bit and just dominate that team. And I don't know that necessarily helps Notre Dame. I don't know that, if a UTEP was coming into town this weekend, or, as I mentioned, a Kent State or an Akron was coming into town this weekend, I don't know that we would learn a lot about Notre Dame, because honestly, there are teams that Notre Dame could play this year where they could play the same way they did against Northern Illinois, but they're so much more talented than the opponents that they would still dominate. And this is at least enough of a challenge to where if you don't play well, then you're going to get a closer game, which is going to tell us a lot about this team. At the same time, if you dominate Miami of Ohio from start to finish, right? Like Ryan and I are going to talk about this in the Keys to Victory. I'm going to talk more about it later, more about it tomorrow. This is not last year's Miami team. It's not. Completely different talent base. This is a much different team. But what this game, so like a blowout win doesn't mean, okay, Notre Dame's arrived, but it's a sign. A dominant 60-minute game, or at least a 30-minute game, and then you pull the starters, and then the second team does that. That type of performance is a step. It is an important step to say, okay, now you're playing a team that you otherwise have no reason to get up for. And that's the reason I say this isn't last year's Miami team. If Miami was 2-0 and they had wins over Northwestern and Miami of Ohio, this Notre Dame team would absolutely take them seriously. But they don't. And there's a lot of bad film. I shouldn't say bad film. There's a lot of very average film that these players are going to be watching these first two games. Right? That's what it's going to show. But it's not going to show a very talented football team. So if they come out fired up and they wipe this team off the map, then what you're going to say is, okay, they weren't concerned about Miami of Ohio. They weren't, and what I mean, let me rephrase that. They weren't focused on the quality of the opponent, which is low. They were focused on themselves. They were focused on proving something to themselves, setting a standard. Like, who was it? Was it NH earlier that said it? What is the standard at Notre Dame? I think that's what she said. What is the gold standard? Right now, it's a roller coaster, not a standard. And that's exactly the point. It's exactly the point. It is, okay, who do you want to be as a football team? Do you want to be that team that shines when your backs are against the wall, but then when you start to have a little success, you kind of, go in the tank? Or are you a team that says, hey, listen, we're excited to come out and play together this weekend, right? This football team only gets so many opportunities together, and we're going to take advantage of all of them. We learned what it's like when we don't do that. That's not going to happen again, because if Notre Dame plays their game of football, if they play their brand of football, they don't lose another game the rest of the regular season. It may not be good enough to beat some of the best teams in the country, but it is good enough to beat the next 9 opponents on their schedule. What we don't know, however, is if that Notre Dame football team is going to show up for the next 9 games. And Saturday's a step to that. That's important. So we're going to find out this weekend if that's who Notre Dame is. Can they build on the success? That's what's at stake against Miami of Ohio. I promise you one thing. I am not going to spend the next 3 days trying to convince you all that this is a really good Miami football team. I did that with Northern Illinois. We did that with Northern Illinois because that was a good football team. They had some good film on the board. They had a lot of guys coming back, and you just really needed to bring your A game, or not. You needed to bring your B game at least to win that game the way you should. This team is not that. They're not as good as Northern Illinois. You've got 2 games of film now. You said, boy, this team is just not who they were last year. This is a different football team. Talking about Miami of Ohio. So it's not going to be about Miami. We'll talk about Miami. We'll prepare for Miami. You guys will have a good understanding of who Miami is. But understand that this game this weekend is about Notre Dame. It's about learning who Notre Dame is this weekend. It's about learning what kind of heart this team has, what kind of pride this team has, what kind of leadership that this Notre Dame team has. That's the key this weekend. It's like NH said, it's about you keep talking. There's things that Marcus Freeman says that I don't know his team is necessarily buying, or at least the way they play, they're not showing it. The gold standard is one, right? Being the best version of yourself is another. We don't see the best version of this football team from week to week. And it's usually an entire team problem. Not always, but usually. And so there's clearly some sort of disconnect that they need to fix and address. And if they can handle Miami the way that they should, then that'll be another step towards telling us maybe they figured it out. And then, of course, against Louisville, it's another step. And again, but beating Louisville doesn't answer that question for me. It's not an opponent that puts the game against Northern Illinois completely out of my mind. Because how do we know that team's not going to rear its ugly head against Virginia or Georgia Tech or Navy or Army or Stanford again? Because, like, look, this version of Stanford is better than the one that Notre Dame played in 2022 and got beat by. That's going to be the key. Is can you start to bring it week after week after week after week? And that's going to be the key for this Notre Dame football team. So we'll see if they can carry it out. So that's part one of the show. I'm going to dive into the offense next and get specific about things that I want to see and what this football team needs to do on offense and defense to take that next step as a program. So I was frustrated with the way the defense played against Northern Illinois. By the way, I can't wait till I can stop saying the words Northern Illinois. I don't know why I can't say that phrase very well or that word very well, but I don't say it well, and I can't wait to stop talking about it. And that's part of the reason I get so ticked off that they lost that game is because I have to keep saying Northern Illinois. But that's where we are. I was not happy with how the defense played in that game. But they didn't lose that game primarily because of the defense. The defense played a role. You know, the first bad thing to happen in that game was the defense. I mean, think about it. The offense got the ball, went down and scored a touchdown first drive. Special teams pins Northern Illinois at its 2-yard line. Defense gives up a 98-yard touchdown drive. The defense got the bad crap started, and the defense kind of finished it by your offense has a horrible interception. Doesn't take anything away from how bad the offense was. But they got the ball for almost 5.5 minutes left, a little over 5.5 minutes, and you didn't get the ball back till less than a minute, and they went down and kicked the field goal. You had multiple chances to stop them from scoring, and you couldn't do it. So the offense was a bigger culprit, but the defense absolutely played a role. But at the same time, they did only give up 16 points. The biggest issue for Notre Dame in a lot of these games has been the offense. The defense had its chances to win the Marshall game, but it was winning in spite of the offense. The defense had chances to win the Stanford game in 2022, but it would have been winning in spite of the offense. The same with the Ohio State game last year. The defense had a chance to win the game at the end, but it would have been a win in spite of the offense. The same thing about Louisville last season, where the defense, I mean, they battled as much as they could, but it just got to the point in time where the offense was so useless that the defense couldn't hold a Jeff Brom coach team down for 4 quarters when you're getting nothing from the offense. So at the end of the day, this is primarily, not exclusively, an offensive problem. There is an energy level, there is a focus, there is a lack of physicality that has been prominent from both sides of the ball, or at least it was against Northern Illinois. But it's the offense that has been the driving force behind a lot of this frustration. And so that side of the ball is going to have to figure it out. And they're going to have to play a lot better. If Notre Dame is going to be more steady and consistent, this side of the ball is going to have to step up and continue to play well. And this is a game where they should be able to play better and keep things rolling. Right now, Miami of Ohio is a better team on defense than they are offense. And they have 2 guys on their defense that I had on my preseason all-opponent team. And that would be their inside linebacker, Matt Salopek, who makes a ton of tackles. He's got 19 through 2 games, which means he's been below his pace from last year because he was over 10 per game last year. He had 143 tackles last year. And then they also have a defensive end named Bryan, who I think is a good football player. He was on my second team as well. He was a kid that last season for the Red Hawks had 62 tackles, 12 tackles for loss, and 8 sacks, and had, I'm trying to remember what the Pro Football Focus numbers were, but they had him down for, I think it was over 50 pressures last season. He's got 9 so far in 2 games this season. He's a kid that can put a lot of pressure on the quarterback. Last season, they had him down for 64 total pressures, 18 hits or sacks on the quarterback. So they've got some good players, but overall their defense is scrappy. It's a well-coached unit, but it's not super talented. And Notre Dame should be able to have success in this game. And if they play well, that's going to be where Notre Dame is going to have to be able to go out in there and have some success. And so, those are things that we need to see. We're going to learn a little something from this football team on Saturday. We're going to learn a little something about this offensive football team on Saturday, because it's an opponent that if you're not locked in, if you like, here's the thing. We saw we saw a Notre Dame offense against Northern Illinois that completely perfectly summarizes the schizophrenia we've seen from Notre Dame in 2024. Because Saturday, we're seeing motion shifts, misdirection. We're seeing all this creative stuff, moving the pocket, play action, all these things that we've been begging for. A week before, we saw a very stagnant, stale offense against Northern Illinois. If they come out with that same stagnant, stale stuff against Miami of Ohio, because they're, quote unquote, working on stuff, then we'll get a somewhat similar result. It'll be better than it was against Northern Illinois, because I don't think this defense is as good as Northern Illinois'. But it won't be pretty. And so this group needs to come out and play better. This is the unit. I'm curious if you guys all feel this way, but when I think of the concerns I have about Notre Dame's up and down play, it's the defense is still going to be a little up and down. Everybody's that way. Nobody plays locked in every single week. I don't care who you are. I don't know that I've ever seen a defense in my lifetime anyway that just every single year just goes out there and just destroys everybody they play, and the defense plays elite every week, and they never have any struggles. They never give up points. They never do any of those things. Well, I don't know that I've ever seen that. Heck, even Bama in 2011 is probably the closest I'd come to that. But I remember watching them struggle in the first half against Georgia, stopping Georgia Southern that year. So even they had a game. You think of the LSU offense in 2019. They struggled against Auburn. They scored 23 points in that game. They moved the ball, but they couldn't score. So you're always going to have, and I don't want to say bad game, but a game where you're not at your best. The concern is when that happens to the defense, Notre Dame can lose to a lot of people on their schedule based on how the offense is played. Because the offense just may flat out not show up. And that's what happened in Northern Illinois game. And so, yes, the defense absolutely played a role in that loss. But if the offense was just average in that game, Notre Dame wins by at least a touchdown, if not by 10 or more. And so that's the side of the ball that I'm most concerned with. And that's the side of the ball that this game is going to mean the most to me, because can they keep that same hunger that they had last weekend and really come out and bury a team? That's going to be a key. And now they're going to have to do it with one of the biggest question marks on the team is now an even bigger question mark. And that is the offensive line. And obviously we got some news yesterday. Notre Dame's offensive line is going to be down 2 starters for at least the next game, possibly next 2 games, likely next 2 games. Hopefully after the break, if there's no setbacks, hopefully you can get Billy Schrouth back. But for right now, he's out for this game. Ashton Craig is out for the season. And obviously the Notre Dame's already lost Charles Jagasol for the season. So now you're going to have a much, much different looking offensive line. The disappointing thing is we started to see this line kind of come together early against Purdue, and they were playing at a pretty high level, and you would have liked to see them get a chance to build on that. That's the unfortunate part. The fortunate part is that you now have an offense. You're not replacing those guys with unproven players. When Billy Schrouth went down, they inserted Rocco Spindler at right guard. Rocco Spindler was a 10-game starter last year. Rocco Spindler, when he was on his game, was a pretty good player last year. He's got to not be so inconsistent, but he was steady against Purdue. I need to see him bend a little better at the knees. I need to see him he has a tendency when he hits, he kind of stands straight up, and that's when he can lose his power. I want to see him drive through contact a little bit better. That's been a consistent issue for Rocco. But if Rocco's on his game, they're going to be okay at right guard. And then you have Pat Coogan coming back stepping in at center for Ashton Craig. Pat Coogan's Pat Coogan, right? He's going to compete. He's going to battle. He's a smart kid. I think center does a better job of masking some of his athletic ineffectiveness or inefficiency or deficiencies, I should say. It masks some of that. And he gives you a veteran player there. I feel a little better about, making sure protections are set and calls are set now. But you are losing talent. But now you go into the game where, let's say Notre Dame's offensive line has gained 15 starts. You had the 6 they had from last year. Notre Dame would have been going into the Miami of Ohio game with 21 career starts from their offensive line. Now you're going into this game with 32 career starts from your offensive line because you're inserting 2 players that have 23 combined starts with the 3 guys that now have 9 in Pendleton, Knapp, and Wagner. And so, but the scary thing is that, we talked a lot about coming in the season, like, we thought Notre Dame would be okay on the offensive line because you're bringing back every guy that started for you in the bowl game and the guys that played for you down the stretch. And so when you look at the last 3 games, 4 of those 5 starters are coming back, or 3 of those 5 starters were coming back. And then you had both starters coming back from the bowl game. Now you go into this Miami of Ohio game and literally you have 1 guy coming back that started any of those 3 games, and that's Pat Coogan, and he's not at the position he played last year. Your left tackle's different, your left guard is different, your right guard is different, and your right tackle is different. Because, yes, Rocco started the first 10, but Rocco didn't play in the last 3. He didn't play in the bowl game. So there was some kind of comfort in that, knowing it's going to be an inexperienced offensive line. There was a comfort level in saying, hey, listen, you've got Jagasol back, you've got Coogan back, you've got Spindler back, you've got Craig back, you've got Schrouf back, you've got Baker back. Let's see what these other guys can do. And now a lot of those guys are gone, and the guys that are playing are the guys with the lowest ceilings. And so that adds a little bit of concern to the conversation. I thought Rocco looked great in the spring game. I thought Rocco did some good things against Purdue. Can he be more consistent? And that was an issue for him. That was an issue for the entire offensive line last year, for everyone not named Joe Alt, was consistency. So we'll see if Rocco kind of has that. Does where's his mindset at? Does, kind of getting quote unquote beat out in fall camp, did that impact his attitude negatively? Did he stay hungry? Did he stay mature and focused? That hey, if my time comes, I'm ready to go. I'm leaning towards that as being where Rocco's head is, just based on some conversations I've had. But I think that's you're losing Schrouf. It stinks, but not a lot of people can lose a guy like Billy Schrouf, an inserted 10-game starter who's got some ability into a spot. Not many people can lose an Ashton Craig and put a 13-game starter in there to replace him. So you're not going to have as much talent, but you're gonna have more experience. And now we got to see if this group can come together. That's going to be the next big question. Can they come together? How quickly can they get on the same page? Well, this is a perfect opponent because in a lot of instances, I said, I don't know that I would want to play Louisville this weekend because I feel like you'd get a confident Notre Dame team and a focused Notre Dame team against Louisville. But offensive line wise is the one position where I'm kind of glad they're not playing Louisville because it might be a problem. Because you want to get a game of this group of 5 together before you go play Louisville next weekend, who has a very good front 7. And so that's going to be a focus for Notre Dame, is this Miami Ohio game is going to have to be a get-together game for this offensive line. Coogan's communication, Rocco and Emil's communication. It's going to be about, now think about it. The left side of your line, which is a freshman and a redshirt freshman, is your most, experienced group this season in working together. And obviously that's a bit of a concern. So it's going to look a lot different, and they're going to need this group to play well. And I think one thing that we can all agree on is that what we have seen from Notre Dame each of the first, including Northern Illinois, is if the offensive line is just solid, that's it, just solid, this offense can run the ball on just about anybody. And the reason I say that is because they have dynamic players. So I have my run game breakdown at Irish Breakdown, and there's 6 plays that I broke down. 5 I broke down more than the last one. The last one was just kind of showing off just how talented this team is. And on a couple of those plays, I said, look, guys, these are not like dominant blocks. These aren't Notre Dame coming off the line and driving guys 8 yards off the ball. This doesn't look like, oh, that's a vintage 2017 Notre Dame football team right there. Like when you look at the numbers that Notre Dame rushed for on Saturday. I mean, they look like a 2017 Notre Dame squad, right? I mean, that's what they look like. 362 rushing yards, 8.2 yards per carry. Looks exactly like they did during that great stretch from BC to Wake Forest that year. I mean, 515, 10.1 yards per play, 333, 8.5, 341, 6.0, 377, 8.0, 318, 5.9, 380, 8.3. Very much in line with that type of performance. But what it wasn't was the same kind of dominance that you saw from the 2017 offensive line, where they just were just mean, they would just destroy people. I mean, just physically destroy people. I mean, they basically got USC to quit. It hasn't been that. And actually, it's kind of a good thing. What it has been, it's a young group that's still making mistakes. But what it is it's a young group that understands I don't have to be Quentin Nelson. I don't have to be Ronnie Stanley. I don't have to be Joe Alt. I don't have to be Liam Eichenberg. I don't have to be Mike McGlinchey. I don't have to be Alex Bars. I don't have to be that guy. I don't have to be him. I just have to do my job. That's it. I just have to get a body on a body and do my job, and we've got to do our job together, because if we just do our jobs, it's just simply just do your job. Number 4, number 24, number 13, heck, even number 20, number 21. Did you guys watch Kedron Young on Saturday? I mean, like Notre Dame's 4th or 5th running back would start. Like all 5 running backs that Notre Dame played on Saturday, in my opinion, are better than anyone that Purdue has. I mean, it's guys, we got dudes back there. That's what you're saying to yourself. You're Notre Dame offensive lineman. I just got to be the guy that doesn't screw it up. Because what that film breakdown showed is the same thing it showed against Northern Illinois, and the same thing it showed against Texas A&M, which is if you can get this group of backs and quarterback into space onto the second level, there's not a lot of people that can stop them. There's just not. And this offensive line is, I think, figuring that out. Joe Rudolph, I think, knows that. And that's what the focus has to be. Guys, I don't need you to come out and be Quentin Nelson. I don't need you guys to go win the Joe Moore Award tomorrow. All I need you to do is do your job and do it hard. And if you do that, then you let the backs do their thing. And we've seen what happens. And football, a running back is always going to have to make somebody miss. And this running back room is filled with guys like that, and they have a quarterback that can do that. And so they just got to do their job, and that's all that's needed. It's kind of interesting that we're talking about how Notre Dame doesn't need a dominant offensive line for this team to be successful. They just need a good one. That's it. And we're going to find out if this team can be a good one. And the Miami of Ohio game is important for that, because you do now have 2 new starters. That's really where you're at. You got 2 new starters and when you talk about offensive line, it's not just about plugging 2 new starters in. It's now there's a different level of communication that has to happen. Not different level. It's a new communication that's happening with the offensive lineman, because you start to kind of develop a rapport with guys you play with every day. And now you're putting a couple new guys in there. Sometimes, I mean, like great offensive lines, they don't have to talk sometimes. They just kind of look at each other and they both know, I'm seeing what you're seeing. We got this. And when you've got 2 guys that haven't played as much together, it's like, hey, I'm seeing what you're seeing. And the other guy's like, I'm seeing what you're seeing, but they're not actually seeing what each other's seeing. And that's how, like, oh, I thought you were going to do this. Well, I thought you were going to do this. 3 technique just ran through untouched and got a tackle for loss. So we're going to need to see this offensive line really come together and build on the run game success. Now, the good news is on Saturday is that we saw this offense make some big plays in the run game after your starting offensive lineman got hurt. And obviously that's a bit of encouragement, in my opinion, to see that, is to see like, okay, yes, it's nice. It'd have been nice to, to go out there and have a big day and keep all your guys healthy and all that, but you didn't. And so can you say, well, yeah, we had all this success, but 2 of the guys were driving force behind that weren't there. Well, Billy Strouth went down in the first quarter. I mean, he was there for the first couple big runs, but several of the big runs later in the game, they had Rocco Spindler in the game, and they had Pat Coogan in the game, and they were still able to make big plays. If you go back and look at the 34-yard touchdown run that Riley Leonard had against Purdue in the second quarter, you had Rocco Spindler at right guard. Ashton Craig was still in the game, but you had Rocco Spindler at right guard. When you look at one of the long runs that Jeremiah Love had, when you look at the 70-yard touchdown run that Jeremiah Love had, or Dejarian Price had at the end of the game, Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan were both on the field at that time. They weren't as dominant in the second half running the football, but they didn't have the same. It was just different for a host of reasons. So They did okay. Now they need to build on it and see if they can kind of keep that going for here these next 6 games. And if you don't know, I do have an all 22 run game breakdown where I broke down 6 plays on the board. You guys can go check that out here after the show's over. You can go take a peek at that because I break down 6 plays from the game and talk about it. But we're going to have to find out if this offensive line can get there. There's more though, and there's a very strange conversation happening on Irish Breakdowns board right now, and I don't know if this is happening on other platforms, but it's definitely happening on mine, and it's a little frustrating to be honest with you, because there's a segment of the fan base that is unwilling to enjoy what they saw on Saturday. Because I think they're still upset about what happened the week before. For some people, for others, it's okay, but this notion in your head of if they're going to beat this team, they got to do this, and that's all fine and dandy. And so they'll just say, hey, Saturday wasn't good enough. Purdue just sucks. And even though this is the worst Purdue loss in the history of their program, it's nothing to be excited about because they didn't complete passes beyond whatever yards with the starting quarterback. And then there's another side of the fan base that's like, no, if you play like this every game, you're going to beat everyone by 50. And that's not true either. I believe that if Notre Dame simply repeats the performance they had on Saturday in every phase of the game, that they will beat every single team on the rest of their schedule. But that's not the standard. The standard isn't beating those teams. It's beating those teams and then having postseason success. When you play the Bamas, you play the Georgias, you play the Texases, the Ohio States, the teams like that, you're going to need to be more balanced offensively. There's no question about that. No question about that. And what I don't understand is why some people are just unwilling to say that's true. And this is true on both sides, but it's more so on the people that are not enjoying the game because they're so hyper-focused on that one part that they think if you say anything good about anything else, then that means you're ignoring that this part still needs to be better. And I reject that because you need to be able to do 2 things at once. And one is to say, hey, look, is Notre Dame a finished product yet throwing the football? No, not even close. At least I hope they're not. But you can also say, like, hey, we saw steps on Saturday. Certainly saw steps. We saw steps schematically. Notre Dame was able to do things in this game to get guys free by play design. It wasn't just blown coverages by Purdue. It was the blown coverages were happening because of things that Notre Dame was doing in the game. And that's a good thing. Now, the next step is going to be building on that. Here's the simple reality. They didn't need to throw the football down the field against Purdue. Purdue wasn't doing anything to take away the things that Notre Dame was trying to do. Nothing. And so I don't know that there was a need. And if Notre Dame doesn't have a left tackle jump into the lap of the quarterback, Riley Leonard has an easy touchdown pass, and a lot of this conversation is not being had. The reality is this. If you aren't willing to look at the positives that we saw from the pass game on Saturday and say it was a building block, then I don't know what to tell you. You're not having an honest conversation about what they did on Saturday. On the flip side, if you're not willing to say, yes, it was a step, but it was just a step, a lot more is needed, then you're also not having an honest conversation. And that's where this game comes into play, is Notre Dame took a very big step in the pass game on Saturday. Your quarterback was on pace for 224 yards passing and 200 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns against a Power 5 team. That's pretty good. You may not be able to replicate that against future teams. And that's why another step is needed. And they're still going to need to get Riley Leonard in a position where there's more of the vertical passing game. And what I mean by vertical passing game, I don't mean just throwing bombs, hitting the slot fade. That's part of it. It's also about sticking with your reads long enough to find the backside dig, to hit that deep in cut, to hit that deep under route, to hit the corner route more consistently. He's hit 1 corner so far this year. He hit 1 deep out cut on Saturday. They got called back from a penalty that I'm hoping is a sign of things to come. But, yes, he hit the one back shoulder against Texas A&M. Yes, he hit the one corner route against Texas A&M. Yes, he hit Jaden Greathouse in the hands on a slot fade against Northern Illinois. But when you can point to in 3 games like 3 or 4 throws and say, "See, he can do it," you're not really making the point that you think you're making. It should be 3 or 4 of those things per game. And that's where Notre Dame needs to get to throwing the football. They're never going to be a team, and it shouldn't be a team. Mike Denbrock's team at LSU wasn't this way. They were very good throwing the deep ball. They didn't throw it a ton. Right now, Notre Dame not only doesn't throw it a ton, they're not good at it. And they need to be better at it. And there's a lot of different reasons why it's not happening. Sometimes it's been the quarterback. Sometimes it's been the receivers. Like we saw that, right? We saw Riley not make a couple reads on Saturday. We saw Riley not make a couple reads against Northern Illinois. We saw Riley not make a proper read on a burst corner route against A&M where Bo Collins would have come open for a long play. That's on him. We saw Jaden Greathouse drop a ball in the slot fade last week that would have gone for a big play. We saw some guys break their routes off or not run their routes real slow, and Riley was looking at them. We saw a play where the receiver ran it correctly. It was a great call. Quarterback sees it. He's about to throw it, and the left tackle jumps into his chest and hits him as he's throwing the football, and the ball dies. Like there's been times when Riley had a read, but the pressure got there too quick. All parts of the offense right now. And then I thought it was a very poorly designed game against Northern Illinois. Every aspect of the offense is factored into why the pass game is not where it needs to be. And it wasn't where it's needed to be in the second. I think the fact that people are so overreacting to one throw from Steve Angeli says a lot about the frustration and concern that people have about the lack of a vertical passing game from the other offense, because there was a lot of misses there's 3 misses from Steve Angeli on that concept in the second half. He badly underthrew KK Smith on a ball where KK smoked the corner off the line. And then there's 2 other times where he had a vertical read that he didn't go to. And so it's a deep ball. Oh my gosh. No, there's a lot that needs to happen. That should be a normal thing. And it hasn't been. And so, yes, Jaden Greathouse needs to make that catch last week. Yes, and Anthony Knapp needs to make that. But then there's other times the quarterback's not making the throw or not making the read, and that's got to get better. And so when I look at this Miami of Ohio game, you saw steps against Purdue. You got the running backs involved. You got the tight ends more involved. That was huge. That needs to continue. We started to see a lot more movement that did things to get guys free. That's a positive step. The receivers did some good things in the game on Saturday. I'm very curious to see if they can get Chris Mitchell going, if they can get KK Smith going. That's going to be something that I want to see, a couple of those fast guys. But we need to see more from this pass offense. There's no doubt. Do they need to go out there and throw for 350 yards on Saturday? No, they don't. And because I don't believe that they have to throw for 350 yards a game that's hyperbolic to have a great and elite offense, but they have to be better than what they've been. That's absolutely true. And that's the sweet spot they've got to find. What is the proper pass game balance that you need to hurt people? And then if teams do overload you with the run game, you need to be able to throw for 300 plus yards. Right now, this team is not capable of that. I don't know that anyone should argue otherwise. I feel that's as absurd as an argument to say, as just I learned nothing about the pass offense on Saturday. Well, that's just not accurate. Or maybe that's a you problem, but to act like, hey, you know what? Change this one thing and you're going to throw for 350 the next game. Look, there's going to be a game where they need to throw for 300 yards this year to win. That's going to happen. Run game's going to be struggling. O-line's going to be getting whooped. Defense is going to be struggling. Something's going to happen, whether it's a regular season game or whether it's a playoff game. You're going to have a game where you're going to have to throw up for 300 yards. I haven't seen anything through the first 3 games that tells me that this offense can go out there and do that. I haven't seen that. And so they're going to have to improve on that. And this is a great game for that. And so what does that look like? Keep doing what you're doing with the tight ends and the running backs in the pass game. That was great. I love seeing that. Do a lot more of the things that we saw on Saturday with the pre-snap movement and doing things to kind of gain leverage and get guys free. Teams are going to have answers for that. You've got to have answers for that. So, at some point in time, you hit a couple of those slide cuts. I want to see Notre Dame run a reverse pivot. where they overplay that. You come back inside and boom, you're running underneath, clear out that, have like you guys saw the motion they did where they went trips like a bunch like this. And they brought a guy in and motion and they would run that little slide route or a quick out cut. And then they did the route with Jaden Thomas where he ran in and then pivoted out, got him free. Love that stuff. That stuff can get you some key plays, and it did. But part of that is Purdue hadn't seen that on film yet. Well, Miami of Ohio will, Louisville will, Texas will, Georgia will, Bama will, except USC will. So now you've got to have some answers to that. And I don't want to give away too many answers, but you guys, some stuff off of the screens that maybe you take a shot, some things where you go in the opposite direction. There's all types of different things that you can see that you want to see by that. And to say, hey, look, this is taking another step schematically to counter some things. And then, of course, the quarterback's got to continue to do a better job. They've got to find a way. Like, I don't need Notre Dame to try to turn Riley Leonard into Bo Nix or turn Riley Leonard into Joe Burrow or whoever. What I need them to do is to get Riley Leonard back to where he was at Duke. And that is a guy that can go through his reads, go through his progressions, make smart decisions and say, hey, listen, we're going to be a team that's going to attack the outside. We're going to attack the middle of the field. We're going to attack when we need to vertically. A guy that's willing and able and comfortable and confident to attack all parts of the field. Right now, when Riley Leonard throws over the middle of the field, he short arms everything. And you see it in reps before the game, and you certainly see it in games. You see a guy that even in pregame doesn't have a lot of confidence in himself to throw the ball down the field. Now, the encouraging thing on Saturday was he actually threw the ball better in pregame than he had the first couple games. And so that part needs to come, and you need to get Riley confident to, hey, it's okay to stick on that first read. And like I said, when you're playing A&M and you've got a backside burst corner with a slide, and they're basically playing, they got two guys over there, you got to stick on that read. And once you see that safety come down, it's okay to stick on that read and then take that one-on-one shot. That's the reality. And he's got to do that. He's absolutely got to do that. And you've got to find some things that get him going. And I think a game like this against Miami of Ohio could be that. However, the O-line's going to have to do a good job because Bryan Ugwe is not going to let – actually, did I get his name right? I always feel like I get his name wrong. Give me a second. Yes, Ugwu is not going to allow you to do that. He's going to try not to. He's going to try not to allow you to do that. He's a very good, very, very good, edge rusher. So can they find that? Can they do that? And here's something that can help them. There's 3 players that you need 2 of them to get going for this pass game to really be the threat it's capable of. Like, we're all focusing on Riley Leonard and at times the offensive line, and that's fine. That's fair. But here's the deal. If Notre Dame is going to be the team that we want them to be, that they need to be throwing the football, it's not just about Riley Leonard. It's also about you've got to get 2 of these 3 receivers going. Jaden Greathouse, Chris Mitchell, KK Smith. And one of the 2 needs to be Jaden Greathouse. Got to get him more involved in the offense. Part of this is on him. Part of this needs to be on the scheme. And him and Riley Leonard right now don't have a connection. And the thing that's concerning is when we saw Jaden going off in the spring, it wasn't with Riley Leonard because Riley wasn't practicing. And we didn't get to see them do a whole lot in this fall because Notre Dame didn't give us access to much of anything at all. Riley and Jaden are going to have to get on the same page. And then one of Chris Mitchell and one of KK Smith, one of those 2 is going to have to absolutely, no question about it, be a bigger factor in this offense. We have seen very little of Chris Mitchell. He played a decent amount of snaps. And when I mean very little, I mean he's not getting targeted. There's really not a lot designed to get him the football. And they need to have more design to get him the football. And if he doesn't play well, he doesn't make plays, then you need to put KK Smith in there because KK Smith was running by people on Saturday. And the deep ball that Steve Angeli badly underthrew him. People say that should have been a PI. That shouldn't have been a PI. That ball wasn't catchable. It's way too far behind him. And I don't think it was PI. It was a bad ball. When the guy has 2 steps on the DB, you don't throw a back shoulder throw. You got to lead him. And Riley Leonard's going to have to do that too. One of those 2 guys has to get going. Those are your 2 best potential deep threats. You've got to get one of those 2 guys going. So that's something that I hope and that doesn't all have to happen this weekend, but those are things that we need to see. Hopefully one of them can step up and win this weekend. Right. And that's the reality. And so Saturday was a great building block. If you're someone who thinks this is who the pass game is going to be for the rest of the year, maybe this is a game that'll kind of show you that it is not that way, or it'll be a game that kind of shows you that it is. But at the end of the day, Notre Dame did a lot of good things on Saturday. And if this offense can play every week like it did on Saturday, they're going to win the rest of their games. I still see somebody saying, well, Notre Dame's not going to be the top 4 team playing like they did on Saturday. Actually, I've seen Notre Dame, if they play like they did on Saturday, I could have seen them beat at least 2 of the top 4 teams that we've seen so far, because they absolutely would have beat Georgia the way that Georgia played on Saturday. Like, again, guys, if you're going to have this conversation, you need to have the proper context of everybody and say, well, Notre Dame's got to play better than they did on Saturday. Well, so does Georgia. Ohio State's got to play better than they did in the opener as well. I've seen them not play very well. Notre Dame playing the way they did on Saturday beats Oregon in every game that Oregon has played so far. A Notre Dame from Saturday would have beat that Oregon team in every single game they've played. Is it good enough to beat Georgia when Georgia's at their best? I don't think so. And no one's ever argued that. But is Notre Dame a better team if he plays like that and this offense plays like that the rest of the year? Absolutely. Can Notre Dame beat a lot of teams in the playoff? Absolutely. Can Notre Dame win a championship? No, I don't think so. And they're going to have to be able to be better throwing the ball down the field, which we've said. But if your argument is, well, I don't like that they're missing this, so I'm going to dismiss all of that, well, that's not really a fair argument. That's not really a good faith argument. And that's the issue that I'm having with some of you guys, right? That's the issue that I'm having. And so Georgia gave up 12 points on Saturday. Yeah. Against a crap offense. They gave up twice as many points to Kentucky as Kentucky scored the weekend before against South Carolina. Kentucky got beat at home by South Carolina the week before. They had 6 points. Kentucky had 183 yards of offense against South Carolina. They had 284 against Georgia. They had more rushing yards against Georgia, Kentucky did, than they had against Southern Miss or South Carolina. Because guess what? In September, not everybody plays their best every Saturday. It's about building blocks. Saturday was a building block. I literally don't know of a single person on my message board or on my show that says if Notre Dame repeats what they did on Saturday, they're winning the national championship. They've arrived. This is the great moment where the offense is finally what we all think it's going to be. It wasn't that. No one is saying it's that. But you also have to be willing to acknowledge, if you're going to have a good faith argument, that it was absolutely a great step in the right direction. That's the key. Now, Miami of Ohio, it's about building on that. Keeping that foundation there. Don't lose that. Don't lose what you had on Saturday. Don't lose the RPO game. Don't lose the tight end game. Don't lose the quick game. Don't lose the third down game. This is by far the best third down performance they've had schematically and execution-wise so far this season. Don't lose that. Keep that. But also build on that. Take that next step. Get this part going. Get that part going. And that's going to be the key. And the more you do that, the better it's going to be for you to run the football. That's the key. And that's what we're going to have to build on. So if they can get to that point in time, then this offense is going to be very, very good. They're not there yet, but this Saturday was certainly a step in the right direction. And we'll see if they can keep that going. So I'm going to get to the defense next, folks. But before I do, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And if you've not done so already, sign up for the message board at boards.breakdown.com. We're having some good conversation, some's not good conversation, but certainly a lot of conversation is happening on the boards right now. And I just feel like my only frustration is I feel like some people are just kind of plugging their ears and closing their eyes and just assuming they think they know what people are saying and not actually having a good faith debate. And I think part of that is still the frustration from last week's game. I think a lot of that is that, and that's fair. But hopefully we can kind of get back to just not always being so towards each other and just have some good conversations. And we'll get there. We'll get back there. That's how frustrating last week's game was. There's no doubt about it. So make sure you sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, let's talk about the defense a little bit before we dive into Miami, Ohio. And, the offense isn't the only unit right now that's got to deal with injuries. The Notre Dame defense also has to deal with a very, very tough injury because through the first two games, the defensive line was not playing to its potential at all. And you're heading into this stretch now where the guy that was probably your best defensive lineman through the first three games is now out. And that is Jordan Botelho. And Notre Dame is going to have to find some answers. And, there's some good news that there are some potential answers there, but you're going to have to have some guys step up. Some guys may have to move around. But they're going to have to find some answers. And so when we talk about, the Notre Dame defense building on Saturday, first thing they're going to have to do is figure out what they're going to do at defensive end, because you're going into this game against Miami, Ohio, definitely down one player and maybe down two, because Josh Burnham is still listed as questionable. And even if Josh plays, will he be 100%? Probably not. Honestly, for me, if it was up to me and I was Notre Dame, I would sit Josh Burnham for one more game and just let him get healthy, because I care a lot more about having him for the Louisville game than I care about having him for the Miami Ohio game. If you can't beat Miami Ohio without Josh Burnham, you've got way bigger problems, like way, way, way bigger problems. And so I look at this game and say, look, defensive line's got to get going. Maybe not having Botelho and Burnham in this game could be a blessing in disguise, because you're now going to get those opportunities to go out there and develop some other guys and some other players. The disappointing thing is when I look at the defensive line, I see a unit that has potential, but it's just not there yet. And defensive end was kind of interesting because with Burnham out on Saturday, what Notre Dame decided to do was play Boubacar Traore at both positions. He played some Viper and he played some defensive end and played well at both spots. And now you lose Jordan Botelho. Say, okay, well, does that mean you've got to keep Boubacar Traore at Viper more permanently? Do you still play him both sides with Burnham out? And then that means more reps for Junior Tuihalamaka. Does that mean more reps for Logan Thomas? Does that mean maybe you go to more of a 3-3 type of look and maybe get, Kingston Viliama-Asa, Jalen Sneed, some reps, not as a Viper, but as, that third linebacker that you can then kind of move around and bring off the edge, kind of basically playing a little bit more nickel in those type of situations. I don't know what the answer is. And if you're going to say, well, look, we need to keep Boubacar at Viper because kind of looking at it again from the coach's standpoint, we're going to keep Boubacar at Viper now because he's now the full-time Viper. And so that means you got to find some answers at defensive end while Josh Burnham's out. Does that just mean more snaps for RJ Open? Does it just mean more snaps for Bryce Young? Does it mean that maybe you get Junior Tuihalamaka over there and play him some there? Does it mean that maybe you get Jason Onye some defensive end snaps? I don't know what that answer is, but I do know this, that Notre Dame needs to find an answer. And now it's find an answer at both spots. So they could easily just still cross-train Boubacar and now Tuihalamaka and maybe Logan Thomas play a little bit more at Viper. They could just keep him at Viper and go there. I'll tell you an interesting scenario that I would consider if I was Notre Dame is if I would consider this. And real quick, Jim Haller, you don't need a dominant nose guard in a 3-3 unless you're just playing two gapping. You can do a lot of the same things you're doing now in a 3-3. It's just you've got a linebacker doing a lot of that stuff and not a defensive lineman. It's still slanting, it's still twists, it's still all that stuff. This isn't talking about going to an old Cowboys 3-4, an old Patriots 3-4. We need Vince Wilfork. So it's not needed. And again, it's a wrinkle. It's not your full-time defense. So there is to that. And Notre Dame had a pretty good 3-3 defense at times in 2021, and they didn't have a dominant nose guard. It's a wrinkle. It's something that you can go to in certain situations to say, hey, look, let's get some more athletes on the field against certain looks. Now, are you going to do that against a team that's running the football all game? No, you're not going to do that against a team that's running the football all game. Going to a 3-4 doesn't fix that because you still need that edge player. And I don't know that any of the quote-unquote linebackers are that guy. It's about staying true to who you are. Maybe you adjust your personnel groupings to where you get a little bit more of this look in certain situations. But Notre Dame doesn't have a bunch of linebackers that are just going to go over there and be vipers all the time, except for one guy. There's one player that plays linebacker right now that I would strongly consider if I was Notre Dame moving now that Patelho's down, and that's Preston Zinner. I really like Preston Zinner from what I've seen from him in practices, going back to fall, going back to the spring. He's a big kid. He's athletic. He's pretty strong. He runs well, just not as well as the other linebackers. But if you put him at Viper, I think he could do some things. I would strongly consider having him play there. And anyone that thinks putting Jalen Sneed permanently on the edge is an answer, guys, he's barely 220 pounds. Jalen Sneed is only an edge on third down. You're not going to put him on the edge in normal down situations because you talk about beating good teams are going to go put a tight end on him and run at him all day. Now, you put a guy like Preston Zinner over there, he's 235, he's 240, he's got some more size, he's got some more strength. That's a guy that I could see as being, quickly adapting to that position. This is kind of where Notre Dame is in certain spots. And it's kind of, it's unfortunate for the specific players, but it's very good for Notre Dame. And what I mean is this, they're in a situation where they've got some guys on the team that in past years would be really good football players and starters or contributors that right now are struggling to get on the field because of just how good they are everywhere else. I mean, that's really where it's at. And you look at a guy like Preston Zinner, I mean, and this is just what I've seen from him in practice, but what I've seen from him in practice, when I watch him run around, when I go watch him do drills, when I watch him strike a bag, when I watch him play linebacker in different periods, I see a guy that, man, I'm like, that guy's a good football. He's like 6'3", he's 240. He can run, he can hit, he's smart. He's just buried on an absolutely loaded linebacker depth chart. And I look at him, I'm like, in 2018, if Preston Zinner was a sophomore or a junior in 2018, or not 2018, 2020, he probably starts at linebacker over Shane Simon. I'd be shocked if he wouldn't start over Shane Simon. When you look at Preston Zinner and you think about some of the years where Notre Dame was trotting out certain guys, you're like, a veteran version of Preston Zinner plays over that guy. Heck, a sophomore version of Preston Zinner plays over that guy, even if it's just part of the rotation. But now, unfortunately for Preston, he just happens to be at Notre Dame at a time where they're just loaded there. I would strongly consider that as an option for that Viper position. If they decide not to do that, whatever, they need to find options. But I would consider that. That's the only linebacker that I would consider making a full-time move to that position. And if you're talking about Jalen Sneed, no. It's not happening. Only in pass rushing situations is that going to happen. Same thing with Kingston. There's no need to move Kingston there because he would need to add some weight, and I'm not adding weight on him. There's no need for that. He's your future at inside linebacker. Having him play Viper takes away from that. Not having him playing linebacker takes away from your linebacker rotation, and you can't do that. There are other better options for that position than putting Kingston there, and definitely better than putting a barely 220-pound Jalen Sneed there. Like, that's not happening. There are answers, however, they need to find. And we're going to find out if they can do that and see if they can get that going. Because when I look at this defense, I I still view the defensive line as a concern. It hasn't been bad this year. It just hasn't been as good as it needs to be. And that's problematic for me. They really need a wake-up moment for Howard Cross and Riley Mills. Really need a wake-up moment. Now, the good news is that this past weekend, we did see Jason Onye break out a little bit. But can he continue that week after week? We need to see. Hopefully he does. But even if Jason Onye plays every week like he did on Saturday, you still need more from Riley Mills and Howard Cross. You have to have, like, they combined for one tackle. Now, breaking the game down, I think they should, because they didn't have Howard Cross down for a tackle. I watched Howard Cross make a tackle in that game. One. So they should have had two. But the point stands that they're just not getting enough production right now from Howard Cross and Riley Mills. Not even close. And this defense is not going to be the group it's capable of being without that. I'm looking at Notre Dame's stats right now, and Riley Mills in the season has yet to produce a tackle for loss. Howard Cross has produced 2.5. It's been a flashy play here, flashy play there. It's not consistent. It has to be better. Both of them have to be better. And until they do, you're going to have to be there. Jim, I never said that they're going to have a linebacker two gap inside. I have no clue what you're talking about. I said you're not asking them to two gap. So I don't mind you disagreeing with me, but at least disagree with something I actually said. Why would I ask a linebacker to go two gap inside? That makes no sense. That's not what I said. So anyway, looking at this defense, you need those two to get better. You need Jason Onye to build on what he did on Saturday. You need RJ Open to play moving forward like he did in the second half of the game on Saturday. That was one of the things that I didn't talk a lot about in the upon further review, that breaking the game down gave me a little bit of optimism, is that we started to see some flashes of RJ Oben. Now, not what he was at Duke by any stretch. He's still struggling there, but we at least started to see some flashes from RJ Oben. And he did a couple nice things in the run game that I liked. He didn't really do a whole lot in the pass game, but he did some things in the run game that I liked. That said, okay, maybe he's figuring it out. Maybe he understands he's got to play with a little bit more fire and those type of things. I mean, this is a kid that in the last 3 years at Duke had 93 pressures in the last 3 years at Duke, had 14 sacks, had 14 more hits on the quarterback, according to Pro Football Focus, who's yet to record a single pressure in 3 games at Notre Dame. They need, like, you could say, well, maybe he's not as good as we thought he was going to be. Okay, fair. But he's definitely better than this, because we've seen him be better than this, and they need him to get better. And so they're going to have to figure out some answers there. So there's a lot of veteran, means 2 6-year seniors and a 5th-year senior that right now at Notre Dame are not playing to their potential. And honestly, that's my biggest concern about the defense right now, is that you've got Xavier Watts is playing like an All-American right now, no question. And Jordan Clark did not play well in the opener. He was okay, wasn't great. I thought he played solid against Northern Illinois, and I thought he played pretty good on Saturday in limited snaps, because they didn't play a lot in the second half. He's been good. Those two have been good. The rest of the veterans, seniors, 5th years, 6 years, have not played well so far. Jack Kaiser has not played well so far this year. He was a lot better against Purdue, and I'm hoping that that's a sign of things to come. But he didn't play well against Northern Illinois, and he didn't play all that good against Texas A&M either, right? You just don't. And he just didn't. You need him to be better. Howard Cross hasn't been that good. Riley Mills hasn't been that good. RJ Oben hasn't been that good. Rod Hurd's been a little bit disappointing so far as he kind of transitioned to the new position. The young players are really what's fueling this team right now. I mean, Jordan Patelho was pretty good, but he got hurt. But, your young guys are, Benjamin Morrison's had a couple plays here and there, but he's still been very good outside of that. Christian Gray's played great. Don Schuler's played great. The young linebackers are making a ton of plays. You know, I mean, those are the guys that are. Bubakar's been really good. You need to have your veteran players step up, and this is the perfect game for them to do that. That's going to be important. They're going to have to do that. They're going to have to play better. The linebackers are going to have to continue to gain more and more experience, and that's going to be a big part of it. A big part of this too is, you're looking at the linebackers and you're seeing what we hoped we would see. We're seeing a flashy group that's very talented, that's still feeling their way a little bit. And now going to game 4, you need to see a little bit more consistency from them. You're starting to see a little bit more playmaking from them. And the thing I love about the depth at that position is, if one guy has an off game, you're okay because you've had other guys playing. And that's certainly a big part of what they need to do. I think as the defensive line plays better, you're also going to see the linebackers play better. And that's going to be a big part of this. And then the other part too with the defense is just more consistency. And I'm not super shocked by it. If you go back and look at this defense under Marcus Freeman, and that includes even before Al Golden got here. But if you look at the Notre Dame defense the last few years, going back to 2021, they've been slow starters. They weren't great early in 2021. They were good, or 2021 under Marcus Freeman. They were good. They weren't. They had gave up a ton of big plays against Florida. Remember, they were giving up a bunch of big plays. Gave up a bunch of big plays to Florida State. Gave up big plays at Toledo. Gave up a couple big plays at Purdue. They shut Wisconsin down, but Wisconsin's offense stunk. And then Cincinnati kind of ripped them up. They struggled in the second half against Virginia Tech. They eventually figured it out, and they were great in November, but it took them some time to get going. If you look at Al Golden's first year at Notre Dame, they battled against Ohio State. They wore down in the second half. They were not great against Marshall. They were okay against Cal. Kept giving up a bunch of scrambles against Cal. We're giving up a couple big plays to BYU in the run game, and then they kind of started to figure it out around the Stanford game. And they didn't play great against Stanford, but they started playing better against Stanford. But then you started to see, Syracuse and Clemson and Navy and BC, where the defense really started to play at a much higher level. And then, of course, last year's very similar. I thought the defense played fine early in the season, but they weren't great. But as the season wore on, they got better and better and better and better. And I'm hoping that trend continues, because if they're going to play better than they are now, then that's going to be a great step for them, because, again, if you look at trends, and this is true for a lot of teams, you get better and better as the year goes on. I mean, it's like, if you think this team's a finished product right now, maybe they are, but I highly doubt they are, because that's never the case. I mean, it's a bit hyperbolic. It's hardly ever the case. If we're going to be literal, it's hardly ever the case. Most teams either get better as the year goes on, or they get worse as the year goes on. They don't just stay right where they are. And we don't know which direction Notre Dame is going to go, but certainly this is an opportunity for this football team to get better and better and better. And that's what they need to do. And especially defensively, if they can get better, I think they're going to be really good. And what it comes down to is, I want to see more consistency from this defense. Number one, more consistency from a focus standpoint, more consistency from an effort standpoint. We saw it against Texas A&M. We saw it against Purdue. If they play like they did in those two games, they're going to be tough to score on this year. We did not see that against Northern Illinois. And this team has not earned the right for us to chalk it up as it happens game. They haven't earned that right yet. Georgia has earned that right to say Kentucky game was just an anomaly. They've earned that right because they've done that and they still go on and they're a great football team. Notre Dame hasn't earned that right yet. And I get that. They've got to go out there and kind of earn that right and show us that, hey, look, that game was a one-off. You're never going to see that thing again. That comes from leadership. That's not an Al Golden problem. That's not even a Marcus Freeman problem. There's things the head coach needs to do to bring out the best of his football team. But at the end of the day, that's a locker room issue. And that gets fixed in the locker room. Because I don't care if your head coach says, hey, we're not going to practice on Thursday, Friday, then you make sure that as a leader, you get in the locker room and make sure guys are locked in and ready to go. You make sure that you're spending some extra time in the film room as a unit. You make sure that you come out on Saturday and have your boys ready to play and locked in and focused and ready to play hard. And when they're not, you've got to have the leadership to get them going. We need to find that out. I thought the run defense against Purdue was outstanding, and not just statistically. I mean, obviously they shut Purdue down statistically. They had 38 yards on 25 carries, but I thought it was sound on Saturday as well. That's got to continue because the run game was not good the first 2 games of the season. It's got to get a lot better, and hopefully Saturday was a good step, and you can build on it. So consistency with your run defense. And then the other part of it, the final piece for me from the defense is I want to I'm encouraged by what we saw from the pass rush on Saturday. Very encouraged. And I think and thought that this is a quality Purdue offensive line. I liked what I saw in film from them last year. Notre Dame kind of ate them up and kind of dominated them. And late second quarter into the third quarter, you started to see them go out and dominate and make those plays and step up and say, hey, listen, we're gonna get this pass rush with our front four. We're gonna get after it. The ends are making pressures. The D tackles play with great motor. There's going to need to be a more consistent pass rush from this team. And that's another thing that tends to get going a little bit later in the year that hopefully runs true again this season, is that they can start developing more, getting more consistent pressure on the quarterback. They came into this game with 1 sack on the season, and they're going into the Miami game with 5. And sacks don't tell you everything, but they tell you a little something. And this team is going to have to do a better job of getting pressure on the quarterback. And then, you want to look at trends and things along those lines. Well, look at this trend. So Notre Dame on Saturday, if you look at the Pro Football Focus, they had 18 total pressures. That's not a lot more than what they had in the previous weeks. They had, or against A&M, they had 13, I think, against A&M, 18 against A&M. So similar number. They only had 5 against Northern Illinois. So having 18 is like, all right, cool. You did that in the opener. Here's the big difference. Against A&M, they had 2 hits on the quarterback. Against Purdue, they had 4 sacks and 4 hits on the quarterback. So 8 of those pressures. Now they have 7 sacks because they count. If a guy gets a half a sack and another guy gets a half a sack, according to Pro Football Focus, it's 2 sacks, which is fine because you understand that that's the number. And so that's the key. They were getting home a lot more. It wasn't just about, okay, yeah, you had a hurry. It's about you were getting home to the quarterback, and that was the big key for me that to see from that Notre Dame football team is they were hitting home. They also had the highest number of run stops on the season than they've had all year. And when you consider that Purdue ran the ball a lot less, it's a good sign. So we started to see steps, but what we need to make sure that we're seeing in this next game is that it's not just a one-off. Can they consistently start to do this? If what we saw against Purdue was a stepping stone, like we talked about the offense, if it was a stepping stone towards playing even better, then, okay, now let's roll. Build on that. Let's roll. Let's see you guys get going. And it's the same thing with the offense. Like Saturday was a great step, but it's only a step if you build on it. If you revert or regress in future games, then it was an anomaly. Like right now, we're calling the pass game performance from the offense a stepping stone. But if they don't play well in that regard the next 2 games, then it no longer is a stepping stone. It was an anomaly. You didn't build on it. Same thing with the run defense. Same thing with the pass defense, because the run defense especially is something that they have to be very much locked into. Because listen, I know Louisville hasn't played anybody yet. At least I don't think they have. Jacksonville State doesn't seem like they're as good this year as they have been in past years. They played Austin Peay in the opener. I mean, Jacksonville State's 0-3. They got blown out by Coastal Carolina, blown out by Louisville, and then they lost this past weekend to Eastern Michigan. They're 0-3. They're giving up 47 points a game, okay? But look, here's the deal. I don't care who you're playing. Through 2 games, they're averaging 263 yards per game rushing, and they're averaging 8.2 yards per carry. Their top 3 running backs are averaging 12.8, 13.7, and 8.3 yards per play, per carry. Their number 4 backs averaging 5.4 yards per carry. They have 6 rushing touchdowns, just those 4 guys alone in the first 2 games. They have 8 rushing touchdowns as a team in the first 2 games of the season. So, look, yeah. And guess what? They're also throwing for over 300 yards a game. So you're going to face a very tough test running the football in 2 weeks against Louisville and a team that ran on you last year. So this Miami game needs to be a little bit of a building block game to get to that point and to be able to build up yourself to get to that point in the season. So that's what this is. That again, it's not about Miami as much as it's about building for future success. That's what I want to see this weekend, is building for future success. And if they're not able to get there, then, if they have a step back against Miami of Ohio, then I get more concerned about Louisville and teams like that. And, because I just don't believe a team can turn the switch on and off all the time. I think if you get to the point where you're trying to turn that switch on and off, you're going to have some weeks where you do, like they did against Purdue. Maybe they do go a blowout Louisville. There's a chance they could lose to Louisville. I mean, Louisville's capable of beating Notre Dame's B game. They are. If they bring their A game and you bring your B game, you might get beat by Louisville. There's no doubt. And that's true for a couple other teams in the schedule. Maybe they beat Louisville and then they lay an egg against Stanford or lay a game against Georgia Tech. I mean, those are all tough parts of it. And so I want to see Notre Dame go out and build on that success they had last weekend, offensively and defensively, and see them say, okay, we're going to shut Miami of Ohio down. You guys, I'm going to go over the numbers tomorrow. It's a mismatch, even as bad as Notre Dame's run defense was last week, and as spotty as it was against Texas A&M, it's still way better than what Miami Ohio State's offense has been. I mean, they're averaging right now, Miami of Ohio right now, I should say, is averaging. I don't know that they're even at 100 yards rushing on the season. Yeah, they've only rushed for 64 yards total in their first 2 games. It's not good. So I want to see you locked in and dominate it, right? I want to see the pass rush dominate. It's an older Miami of Ohio line. It's a Miami of Ohio that's pretty big. It's not a very athletic or very mobile offensive line. If this defensive line is locked in and focused, then they're going to dominate. And that's what I want to see. So those are the things that I look at as building blocks for Notre Dame against Miami of Ohio. So we're going to get to just a brief overview of the Red Hawks here next, and we'll have a much more thorough breakdown of them tomorrow. But before we do, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review, and of course, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, so finally, let's talk about Miami of Ohio. I'm just joking. It's Miami, Ohio. I just said that because there was some guy that went to Miami that put something out on Twitter the other day where he got a little salty about how people say that school. It's Miami, Ohio. Miami University, the Red Hawks, coached by Chuck Martin, former Notre Dame assistant. One of my favorite people in coaching, by the way. I absolutely love Chuck Martin. He's such a funny dude. He's a very honest guy, good football coach. Chuck Martin won 2 national championships as the head coach at Grand Valley State, and also, I believe, was the defensive coordinator for both of Brian Kelly's national championship teams, which is why Coach Martin got the head coaching job at Grand Valley after Brian Kelly left. So he went 74-7 during his 6-year tenure at Grand Valley State, won 2 national championships. Made it to the semifinals another year, made it to the national championship game in another year, and then 2 years and they made it to the quarterfinals. His last season at Grand Valley State, they went 13-2. Their losses were to Hillsdale and to Northwest Missouri State in the national title game by 7, and got the rematch win over Hillsdale, by the way, in the college football playoff that season. So that was obviously good. But when I look at this Miami, Ohio team, you look at what Chuck Martin's tenure there. He is now going into, his first year was 4. So I think this is year 11 or 12. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. This is his 11th year at Miami, Ohio. They are 100, and he is 56-64 during his tenure at Miami, Ohio. They do have a winning record in the league. They're 44-31. Miami of Ohio has been to a bowl game in 4 of the last 5 years. The only year they didn't go to a bowl game was 2020 because they only played 3 games because the MAC didn't really have much of a football season that year. So in the last 4 years where they have had a full season, Miami of Ohio has been in a bowl game. The year before, in 2018, they did not make a bowl game, but they still went 6-6. Coach Martin has led them to 5 bowl appearances in his 11 years. He took over a Miami of Ohio team that was struggling. They went 0-12 the year before he took over. Took him a little bit of time to get things rolling. If you remember, they had a previous Notre Dame head coach, previous Notre Dame assistant coach there, 2 coaches before Coach Martin. If you remember, Michael Haywood was their coach. He was the last guy to lead them to a bowl game, and then Don Treadway took over and did not do well. So Coach Martin has this team rolling to as much as Miami can roll right now. They're coming off of an 11-3 season last year. Made it to the Cure Bowl, lost the Cure Bowl, but they, in a competitive game, they lost to Miami, Florida in the opener, lost by 4 points to Toledo, and then lost by 4 points in the bowl game to App State. They got payback against Toledo in the MAC championship game, beat them, lost 17-20, 21-17 in the regular season at home. Got Toledo in a rematch in Detroit and beat them 23-14. They also beat Cincinnati on the road last season as part of their 11-win year. Cincinnati kind of got a little payback this year by beating them on Saturday, 27-16. They also lost their opener against Northwestern, 13-6. So they have been competitive in the 2 games that they've lost, but they obviously have not played very well offensively in those 2 games. I think their defense is scrapped. Their defense is battled. It's they got talent at linebacker. They got a very good defensive end. Their secondary is just kind of okay, in my opinion. But their front 7 has a chance to be a pretty decent squad when you look at what the Red Hawks have done so far. There's nothing about them schematically that it's not like Northern Illinois where there's necessarily things that they do schematically that give you a lot of problems on either phase of the game, in my opinion. You know, offensively, they're a normal offense. You know, defensively, nothing exotic that they do. They're just a really well-coached team. They fight hard. They've got some decent athletes in spots. They lost a lot from last year's team to the portal, so they're struggling in that regard. But through 2 games, their offense has been a problem. They lost, as I mentioned, to Northwestern 13-6. They only had 267 yards of offense. Against Cincinnati, they were a lot better throwing the football, and I'll talk about that here in a second. But they threw for 356 yards, but only ran for 24. They only ran for 40 against Miami or against Northwestern. So their run game has struggled quite a bit. And throwing for 356 against Cincinnati is good, but Cincinnati's pass defense is pretty bad this year. They also gave up 302 yards to Pitt in a game where they blew a lead against Pitt and lost that game late. So Cincinnati's defense, not great, not very good. Miami of Ohio was able to rip off some big plays in the pass game in that game. And that's going to be the thing that Notre Dame has had to be concerned about is their run game has not been very good, but they do have some legitimate pass game weapons. Brett Gabbert is a very experienced quarterback. He is a 6th-year senior. He passed for 2,411 yards and 11 touchdowns in 2019. So this kid who's starting in 2024 was Miami of Ohio starting quarterback for 2 years, in which Ian Book was also the starting quarterback at Notre Dame. If that tells you a little bit about how long this kid's been around. Obviously, the COVID year, he was able to save a year with the COVID year. He also got hurt in 2022. And so he got hurt in the opener against Kentucky, came back for 3 games, got hurt again. And then he also missed time last season with an injury as well. Miami was able to kind of salvage their season, but he was on pace for a pretty solid season for Miami last year. Passed for 1,634 yards, 14 touchdowns, 5 picks, had 8.7 yards per attempt. And got hurt in the Toledo game, did not play the rest of the year. Comes out this year. He's off to an okay start statistically. He is passing so far this season. Brett has passed for 566 yards in 2 games. Really feasted on big plays. Actually hit 2 post routes for big long gains against Cincinnati. One was outside, one was inside. They ran a play action pass for a 52, 54-yard touchdown against Cincinnati. Then, of course, came back later in the game and hit a big pass, hit a post route for it wasn't a touchdown, it was a big play to their slot receiver. And that's the only other thing that, in my opinion, Cincinnati has going for them is they have some very good, like MAC level talent at receiver. They've got two kids that you need to keep an eye on. One is Cade McDonald. He is the slot receiver. He'll play inside and outside, but he's a weapon in the slot. 5'11", 200-pound kid, fifth-year senior. Last season had 28 catches for 355 yards for them. Has not really been a factor at receiver for them. Last year was his first year in that regard. Was a pretty darn good punt returner for them last season. But this year he's off to a red-hot start at receiver. He had 8 catches for 105 yards and no touchdowns against Northwestern. And then against Cincinnati, he had 8 catches for 135 yards and a touchdown. So his touchdown was a shorter play, but very dynamic weapon, very good athlete, good route runner. The big play he had against Cincinnati, it was a slot route. He ran, pushed the guy was outside, pressed his vertical, snapped him off in the top, beat him inside. Just a heck of a play, in my opinion. And he's a talented player. You have to keep an eye on him. And then they've got another receiver that's had a bit of a strong start as well for them, and that's their outside receiver, big 6'4" kid by the name of Reggie Virgil. He is a guy that's had another guy that hasn't done a whole lot coming into the season. He had 1 catch in 2022, had 1 catch last year. But this past week, he came off of a game in which he had 3 catches for 77 yards, including a 50-plus yard touchdown against Cincinnati. He had 3 catches for 32 yards against Northwestern. He's a guy that runs well for that level, can stretch the field, big kid, good ball skills from what I've seen so far. So we've got a big 6'4" kid from Florida on the outside in Reggie Virgil. You've got a very shifty slot, quick guy also with some speed in the slot in Cade McDonald, and it's something that you have to be aware of. I mean, those are 2 good football players. Should Notre Dame have problems with them? No. But if Notre Dame's not locked in, can these kids hurt you? Yeah, they can, because you've got a 6-year senior quarterback who's thrown for a bunch of yards. Let me look up Brett Gabbert's career stats and give you a sense of what this kid has done in his college career. So as I mentioned, he's in his 6th year of college football. He has thrown for 8,459 yards in his career. He's attempted over 1,000 passes in his career. He's thrown 61 touchdowns in his career. He's rushed for 450 yards in his career, and he's also rushed for 7 touchdowns. So you're talking about a kid that within the next 2 weeks is going to go over 9,000 career yards of offense. That's a veteran quarterback. You've got 2 talented kids at wide receiver that if you're not locked in, if you're not getting pressure on a quarterback, if you're making mistakes, they will beat you. They will not beat you in the game, but they will beat you on particular plays. And so they're going to have to be aware of that. This is a unit that outside of that struggles. It is. Their offensive line's not been good so far this season. They've got good size. I mean, you look at their depth chart. They're left to right. They're 6'8", 307, 6'6", 324, 6'4", 316, 6'6", 316, and 6'6", 306. Their tight end is 6'5", 258. So they have very good size, but they lumber and they don't move very well, and that's a big reason why their run game has really struggled. It's not a very creative run game either. I would imagine that they're going to watch a lot of film this week and maybe try to recreate some of the things that they saw Northern Illinois do. I mean, that's what a good coaching staff should do. So I would think that they're going to try to take some opportunities in that. But overall, this just isn't a team that should really do a whole lot against you. But if Notre Dame's not motivated and focused, then it may. And so that's why I say we're going to learn a lot about this football team. Are they going to be ready to come out and play? Are they going to be able to be as locked in as they need to do and shut down this Cincinnati team or this Miami team? Because again, guys, I mean, the numbers don't lie. They ran for 40 yards in the first game of the year against Northwestern and 24 yards against Cincinnati. They've thrown the ball well but that's been partly out of necessity. They were losing pretty big. It was like 17-3 at one point in time to Cincinnati. And it's also out of necessity because they can't run the football. And so Notre Dame's going to have to be able to get to Brett Gabbert. Because, look, this is the kind of kid that if you don't put pressure on him, he will find open receivers and make throws and hurt you. You have to put pressure on him. He's also a quarterback that if you pressure him, will make some bad throws. I mean, the thing about Miami is they actually moved the ball pretty well on Cincinnati early in that game. I mean, I think it was their first drive of the game. They got close to the red zone, and then they brought a pressure. I think it was an inside blitz, and Gabbert kind of panics and throws it off his back foot, throws an interception into the end zone. So they had some missed opportunities in that game where they could have made that game a lot closer, but that's going to be a key for Notre Dame is you can't let him get comfortable in the pocket. It's a kid with over 1,000 career pass attempts. He's not going to get rattled just playing in Notre Dame Stadium. He's going to get rattled because you've got guys coming at him from everywhere. That's where he's going to get rattled. And so Notre Dame is going to have to find that out. As Ryan pointed out in the chat, their guards and center are not good. If Riley Mills and Howard Cross don't wake up in this game, I just don't know if it's going to happen. You know, this is a game where they should feast, and then hopefully that's sort of the catalyst they need to give them the confidence and the boost they need to get rolling. So again, this is not a great football team. It's a scrappy football team. Their defense especially is going to compete with Notre Dame. And I don't mean compete meaning like they're going to go toe-to-toe and stop them. I mean, they're going to battle Notre Dame. Their defense is going to absolutely come in and bring it on Saturday. You're going to have to be prepared to scrap against this front seven. If you play assignment football, if you play physical football, you'll win those battles, but you're going to have to earn it. You're going to have to physically earn it. And then I believe Notre Dame should be able to have a lot of success on the outside. That is a place where I do think Notre Dame should be able to take advantage of some speed. But in some ways, they're a lot like Northern Illinois. They're not super athletes, but they're veterans, and they're long. Their nickel 6'1", 216. Their corners are 6 foot and 6'2". Their safeties are 6 foot and 6'2". So, this isn't a team that's just a bunch of small, slow guys. They're a long secondary. Their D-line is 6'4", 6'3", 6'4", 6'3". Their linebackers are 6'1", 230, and 6'2", almost 250, 249. So, again, they're going to bring it this weekend. They're absolutely going to bring it. They're going to be well-coached. They're going to be hungry in this game. Their backs are against the wall. They're 0-2. They need to do something to kind of get their season right. I don't know that beating Notre Dame is that, but they're going to battle. And this team desperately needs something to go right for them. And so they're going to come into Notre Dame looking to, they've got nothing to lose, folks, nothing to lose. So why not have some trick plays up your sleeve? Why not throw some coverages at Notre Dame that they haven't seen before in hopes of getting Riley Leonard to make a mistake? Why not run some pressures that they haven't seen a whole lot in hopes of creating some big stops? Why not use motions and shifts that maybe you haven't used a lot of to create some big play opportunities? Why not? And that's what Miami's going to do. They're going to throw some things at Notre Dame that they haven't seen, because Chuck Martin's a smart football coach. You guys get that. We all get that. As far as I know, Notre Dame fans have always spoke very highly of Chuck Martin because we know he's a smart football coach. We know he's a good coach. And he's a pretty honest guy too, which I like. He's going to have this team mentally ready to play. What Notre Dame is going to need to do is make sure that they don't gain any confidence, and we'll talk about that in the keys to victory. But look, this is a team that Notre Dame should handle, a team that Notre Dame should beat convincingly, but it'll have to be earned. That's a key, is it'll have to be earned, and we're going to find out if Notre Dame has the right mindset to go out there and earn it on Saturday. I actually was looking at this. Do you guys know that in Miami of Ohio's opener against Northwestern at Northwestern, they only had 12,000 people in the stands? That's embarrassing for Northwestern. They're coming off of a bowl game that had 12,000 people in their stands. Miami of Ohio had twice as many people at their home opener as Northwestern had at their home opener. And here's the crazy thing, they only had 11,000 people at their night game against Duke the next week. That's embarrassing. There's FCS teams that have bigger crowds than that. They've had 3 home games. Their biggest crowd so far is 12,000. I know that. Is that because of the temporary stadium? Is that all they can have? Is that the biggest that they can get? You guys said 50 exactly. They have 15,000. They can't even fill a 15,000 seat stadium. That's crazy. That's embarrassing. Like if you only have a 15,000 seat stadium, you should be able to fill that. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. That's a good point, Raymond. That could be it. Look, guys, I get that they have a temporary stadium, and I don't. It's not like it's not the new stadium, right? It's somewhere else. Am I correct on that? It's not like they're remodeling like Vanderbilt's doing it. It's somewhere else. But you have room for what you guys said, 15,000 people, right? They're not even getting to that. That's bad. That's bad. And they're 2-1 and close to 3-0. They lost to Duke in overtime. So yeah, we'll see. Anyway, so that's it for today's show. I do have a couple super chats I want to get to from Raymond Harton. Thank you very much, Raymond. Go Irish, beat Miami. I'm with you. AST12321 says, my friend who watches Croots social media, I would have a talk with your friend and say, maybe you need to find something better to do with your time than that. But hey, he said he's noted a pivot on Deuce's Instagram follows to be more Notre Dame focused. Used to be all Auburn last month. I'll tell you now what I tell you all the time. Do not try to figure out what a recruit is doing by what he's doing on social media. Just don't. I mean, I remember going into signing day last year, or not signing day, but when Kingston was going to make his decision. And Ryan and I kept trying to tell you guys, Notre Dame's in a good place here. Everybody else was trying to tell you all the national sites, Ohio State feels good. They're in a great place. We kept trying to say, hey, listen, we like where Notre Dame is at. Well, but his social media, he's tweeting this. He's liking this tweet. He's liking that tweet about Ohio State. Kept telling you, guys, we like where Notre Dame is at. There's a lot of reasons that could be the case. I don't really care to speak a lot about Deuce other than that. I put an intel piece on the board the other day, AST12321. I would encourage you to read that. That's the latest on where things stand with Deuce Knight and Notre Dame. So other than that, I've said it, even if Deuce says tomorrow, hey, I'm shutting down my recruitment and I'm signing with Notre Dame, I'll feel comfortable with that the day that Notre Dame announces that he has a signature. And that's when that's just the reality of it. So great kid, great player. Just don't really care to talk too much about that recruitment right now. And if I do, I'm going to do it on the board. So check out that message board post that I made. I think it was late last week is when we put it up, because I think that's a good indication of where things stand. So we'll find out if he makes another visit to campus. That'll tell us a lot. So until then, I don't have a lot to say about that one right now, but I don't put a lot of stock. I don't put a lot of stock in that stuff. What guys do on social media. I just don't. The only time it really matters if like a kid like takes all of something off of it. Okay, maybe that's a sign. But I mean, we've seen that Deuce has had a tendency to kind of jump back and forth on things. And so, I'm not going to get too down when he's talking about somebody else. I'm not going to get too up when he's talking about Notre Dame. You guys know I'm going to say, let it play out. And we'll find out. Like December is when I'm going to care. That's just where I'm at on this particular one. So anyway, that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. I thank you all for being with me today. Really appreciate the time. Be back tomorrow, and we will dive into a little bit more about this matchup with Miami of Ohio, and then also some players from Notre Dame that we want to see step up. And then, of course, we'll spend a lot of time on our BISA hold. So Salty has already put up the post on the message board about the BISA hold. So there's already submissions in there. Make sure you jump on there. That is for message board members only. I have a full breakdown, statistical, and a 23-minute video breaking down the run game from Purdue. I'll get some pass game stuff up either tonight or tomorrow. And I'm also hoping to get some defensive stuff up this week, although I don't know that there's a lot to really break down with that. But we'll see when I get back through going through that again. But I'll definitely have some pass game stuff on there tonight or tomorrow, probably tomorrow. And then, of course, the run game stuff went up today. Some very fascinating numbers in the run game also. So you'll check that out. That's only for board premium members as well. You can't see that stuff. You can't see the video. You can't see the stats unless you're a board member at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Definitely check that out. You can get the intel piece that I put up on Deuce Knight last week is still on there. Anytime you're looking for something, just click on one of the tags. So like if I've got an intel piece up about like the injuries yesterday and you click the green intel tag, it'll take you to a page with all of the intel. and then you can find like the most recent one. Same with the film room. If you're like, hey, what have you done past film rooms? I got a link at the top that has a link to all the film rooms. But then if you also hit the film room tab, it'll take you to all the film rooms that we've done at Irish Breakdown on one page. You can check that out as well. But that is definitely a members board, a members only feature, just like Buy Sell Hold is a members only feature from submitting questions. So if you want to get a Buy Sell Hold submitted, go to the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com and you'll see Salty's post asking for questions for Buy Sell Hold, and I'll bring those up and we'll have some fun with that tomorrow. Thursday, 1 o'clock, we'll be back with our keys to victory and preview of the Notre Dame game. And then also the national games. Bill Bender and I were texting about this last night. We are going to discuss, we're going to talk about Illinois, Nebraska, Utah, Oklahoma State, Tennessee, and Oklahoma, and then, of course, USC and Michigan. So those are the 4 games that we will preview and break down on Thursday. And then Friday, we will hopefully have a mailbag. So definitely want to check that out. So thanks, everybody, for being with me today. Y'all have an awesome rest of your day. I'm sure we'll continue some of these conversations on the message board and have some fun with it. So make sure you're checking that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Until then, or at least I should say until 5 o'clock when you guys jump over to Ivy Nation Sports Talk, I will talk to you all again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.